Hi guys, in today's video we're gonna take a look at interacting with the Mongo database, and the reason for doing this is when we would actually start building more complicated web apps involving some login or sign up forms and any other applications that require actually database hooks. Well, in that case we would be using Mongo database in connection with Node.js and Express.js frameworks. And if you have no experience with the databases at all, then it would be a little bit tricky to understand those web programming parts, basically. So that's the reason for actually creating this particular video, and here I'd like to show you what does the Mongo database kind of consists of from the user perspective, in case if we're supposed to use it in our web application. So, well, this is the basic site of the Mongo database, and it also can be downloaded either for Windows or for Linux. And you can also try to Google and other resources on how to install this database to your computer. But it's not about. I'm not about to talk about this in this particular tutorial. Just I'd like to say that there are two major parts that kind of any database consists of: the server and the client parts. And the server starts just like a web server, and in that case you can use any sort of client. It could have been a standard Mongo command line tool or any GUI based applications as well, or even our client might be our web application might be actually the client that is trying to connect to this Mongo database server. And so, assuming that you have already installed Mongo database in your computer, let's move on. And here I've created a little cheat sheet file for some basic commands that are actually involved in Mongo database. Well, this particular code is actually referenced into Linux operating system, but just let me briefly explain what's the core gist of what's going on here. So the first thing to do, we actually have to start so-called mongodb or Mongo daemon, and this program is basically a database web server that is by default is started on the port 21017, if I'm not mistaken. And only in this case we could have used some sort of a client application in order to actually interact with our database, and another command to stop the Mongo daemon, and we could also restart it. Well, so that's fairly self-explanatory, I believe. And depending on the operating system you are, for sure these commands would actually differ, but don't hesitate to Google on how to run the Mongo daemon or the server side of the Mongo database. So that's just like an option that you have to enable in order to actually get some use of this particular database. Well, any database needs some similar sort of things. Well, so let's actually start a little demonstration on this. So the first, if I just call the Mongo client, that basically nothing happens due to the connection is failed. So he can't really connect to the default server over here. So that means that our server is not actually running. So the thing we want to do is actually, well, on Linux we want to start the service. It's like a service here, which is called mongodb, and the start command. And now the server is already running, and now we can actually type mongo again, and here well, here is some warnings, but don't just doesn't matter for now. And actually we're in our command shell that is able to interact with the Mongo database, and the very first command I'd like to introduce is actually show databases. So this command allows you to see all the databases that are available on your system. So well, I believe that these three are just by default here, and this one is actually what I've created for one of my tests recently. So well, and if you want to use the existing database, then either if you want to use the existing database or create a new one, you have to use the keyword use. So in this case, in my database, well, he didn't create a new database, for this is already kind of exists, but so let's just try to see if here is something, and for this purpose we'd use this little command to actually show and print everything that is available in this database at the moment. It's not that big, so we can kind of make it quite easily. So I type database dot user collection find. So this particular method find actually, if I'm not mistaken, it prints the first 20 items in the database. You could find this in a little bit more details about this find method over here in the documentation for Mongo database. And let's call the pretty method. And here you can see that there is one lone object over here, well, one lone entry or one collection, call it like this. So it's kind of pretty it. And one little other thing to mention, that one of the most benefits probably of the Mongo database is that you don't really need to use any SQL queries, or just SQL language is not necessarily actually needed in order to deal with Mongo database. And I personally love this JSON sort of format really a lot, and it's this is especially it comes useful and handy while writing some backend stuff on the server side, when you're making your web application actually to connect to the database. And as far as I'm basically using Node.js and Express framework, well, so everything is JavaScript, and there are lots of JSON handlers over there, so it's quite easy to use JSON all over the place, like in Mongo database and in Node.js and in an Express framework. So this comes really handy. Okay, and now well, let me just exit and run this one more time. So let's say I'd like to create a new database. Well, say new database. Okay, and now I just show databases again, and we can see that actually, okay, use new database. Okay, where is the new one? Oh, it doesn't probably show it for there is not much actually entered there for now. So let's kind of add a little user collection here. So let's type database user collection insert, and you also can actually insert variables here, so not just only the so not just in like the argument has to be the string, well, like not the string but the JSON format stuff here, but also you could use some variables like you would expect this in normal JavaScript. So well, let's say put here something like username and user email. Let's make it 1, and then comma, and then just username 2 and user email 2, and well, basically this is just it. And now another, again, just to see what we got, we actually want to use this prettifier to print. So we got this entries, our user collection over here. So let's try just to show databases one more time. And okay, now the new database has appeared just because we have added actually some data to it. So well, it will be saved as soon as some data has actually been passed there. And this is very important when we are dealing with some web applications, for if there is actually nothing kind of within the database when the web application is running for the first time, it would throw an error like a null object issue, well, something like that. So before ever running any web applications involving some database interaction, it's really necessarily important to create this database instance by hands. So that's quite important then. And well, here you can see like when we can use some define a variable, and then we just use the user collection insert and the variable name. So that's another way to add something, and that's actually the way how we can add stuff to our database using Node.js and Express framework. And well, maybe one last thing is actually how to, well, I didn't save it here apparently. That's the drop. Okay, I did. Okay, drop database. So that's the command to actually delete the entire database. So if we just so now we are actually at the new database, and if I type db.drop database, then basically it has to be deleted already. Okay, so I've deleted this new database that was created just a moment ago before, so everything that was in here was just deleted here. Well, this are the very basic knowledge that you have to like have in order to deal with the Mongo database when you're writing a server-side scripting on your web applications. Well guys, I hope this was interesting, and if you have any questions on especially exactly on some sort of Mongo database itself, that you probably should have searched for its documentation over here. So it's really kind of lots of information, really useful information here. So well, for those purists who are really about to deal with the database itself, but this video is just actually for those who is about to make their own web applications involving some database, and in what particular well, when do you need this as a web developer? Well, anytime you want to when you have to deal with the collections of objects or some lists, like this might be the product lists or the user list. The most simple case is actually the user list when you're making a login or and a sign up form to a particular site or web application. So that's absolutely necessarily needed to actually have these basic knowledges about Mongo database in relation with Node.js and Express framework. Okay guys, I hope this was interesting and hope you enjoyed this. Have a good time and take care.